So you might remember yesterday's presentation from Gary Williams, in which he used some GIS and modeling to identify high-risk electrocution utility issues with Goldens. James Dwyer addressed that issue a couple of years ago, and because of some of the both risks and opportunities, we wanted to continue that discussion. So Tracy Jones with Powder River is going to further talk about that topic. I think you'll see that there clearly are some both challenges and opportunities on that topic. So with that, let's welcome Tracy.
You hear me? Yeah, I don't like using those. Is it too loud? Good. Well, Campbell County Commissioners, I really appreciate you putting this together. It's always good to have minds coming together to talk about issues. Certainly don't like this. I'm going to switch. Is it working? Better? Well, I'm here to talk about nest moves, and I was trying to figure out really why insert nest moves into a group like this when we're talking about regulation and policy and so on and so forth. But I think they put it in here because this is a cooling down period. You know, we have a lot of talk about prosecutions and regulation and how can we change it? How can we do our business around it? Better? Okay, sounds good. So before I get started on this little niche, last night I got a couple phone calls from some of our members. And Tracy, you know, is Powder River getting prosecuted? Why are you sharing all this data with them? Well, no, the answer is no. We're sharing it for another reason. Mike Heasley's here. He's the CEO of Powder River Energy. And one of the things that I saw a long time ago is that Powder River developed a regulatory framework. We choose to work with the solution, not necessarily hinder it. And it's not an uncommon fact that power lines tend to kill birds, especially when you have clearance issues and things like that. So what we're doing is we choose to share information. Gary Williams, I've talked to him a number of times. It's the first time I met him. So it's good to see him. I've got a lot of friends, I've got a lot of colleagues in the audience, people I work with. You got to build those relationships. So no, Powder River's not getting prosecuted. Powder River is choosing to work toward a solution. So we've got a very good engineering department. Quentin Rogers is standing in the back. He's the VP of engineering. And yeah, we just choose to lead our company in the right direction. So let's get back to nest moving. This is completely from a Powder River Energy look. We have the permits in place to do this type of work. We proactively think about the situations that we're going to get into, and then we choose to manage it for what it is. It's actually a danger in many situations. Before I move on, I need to call out somebody here. Gwen McKee was the first person that showed me the process to going through nest moves. And so if you can imagine Gwen standing out there with a bunch of big burly linemen, and she's sitting there telling them where to go and what to do, and these guys have eyes really big, kind of like an owl. It was very interesting to learn from her leadership. And so I wanted to thank Gwen for that. But Powder River has involved many people, consultants, regulators in this process, but let's go ahead and move on. I just want to thank them. So First thing I want to do is take you through a picture view of some of the things that we commonly see. There's our friend the osprey. And you can see that he's taking a structure that is fairly common out on our system, and where we've had to install, this doesn't work very well, does it? We've had to install some perch discouragement, and they love that. They can put their twigs and vines and everything else up inside those, and it holds very well. Thank you, Mike. This is actually fairly dangerous because you get these twigs and stuff running between the conductors, and you have a rainstorm or something like that, or might not even take that, and you'll have some flashover, arcing, and it causes fires, things like that. Here's another common thing that we see on our system, trying to build a nest up on top of a transformer. Same thing. Here's another osprey situation. Their nests get very large, and they try to use all kinds of materials in there. I've seen old bones from calves that died and laid out. They put bones up in there. They've used just about anything. I was just alerted the other day, well, yesterday actually, that we had an outage somewhere close to Gillette, and apparently a piece of wire was picked up and taken up, and that's a pretty dangerous situation too. Here's another view of that nest from above, and I guess one of the things that we look at in terms of, is that nest a danger, is that if this caused a fire or even an arc that would burn a cable into, where are those cables going? Right down on that highway. So we have to address a number of situations that happen out there in the field. Here's another one where right after a rainstorm, lineman got called out on an outage. And you can't see this very well, I apologize for that, but right up here there's some black marks all over that crossarm. And then right there, that pole has been burnt, caused a fire. So linemen go out, and as you can see, Mr. Nash, my friend here in the bucket, is fairly nervous about working around that bird because he knows how big those talons are. But nonetheless, they're out there trying to prevent further damage going on. So why is Precorp so concerned about birds and nests in general? Well, birds and animals contribute to reliability issues. Part of our jobs out there is to provide you with a reliable source of energy. And sometimes when birds build nests or they get electrocuted on our lines, it causes an outage, which is an interruption in your service. And I know most people, when you're sitting there, looking at your cell phone or playing on your iPad or whatever, that was charged by electricity. If you don't have that, then maybe that's one evening you're not going to be playing on the iPad. But most people don't look at it from our perspective. In 2016, we had about 3,900 minutes, outage minutes. It's a little over 64 hours. Doesn't seem like a whole lot. But it is a lot to some people. We moved 2 nests, which one of them we'll talk about here in a little bit. And then we dealt with 2 fires that were caused by nest materials and also a bird that got electrocuted. The fires thankfully weren't very large, but in our drier conditions, it's very concerning, very, very concerning. We also, over the last 5 years, have monitored 77 nests. Out of those 77 nests, we've moved 2. So that's pretty good. That goes to show you that we really take evaluating those nests and whether they're emergencies or not pretty seriously. So can we just randomly move nests? Absolutely not. Powder River Energy has what's called a Migratory Bird Special Purpose Utility Permit. It used to be called the old Federal Salvage Permit. It's very, it allows us to pick up birds that have been electrocuted on our lines and transport them to freezers or wherever we need to send them into the repository. But it also allows us to move nests, active nests. Not eagle or endangered species nests, but, and then the other caveat is it has to be an emergency situation. So, does the nest really need to be moved? You saw from my data that we don't move very many nests. Is it a threat to birds? And some of this language is right in that excerpt out of our permit. Is it a threat to the birds? You know, that owl situation you saw earlier, that was definitely a threat to the birds. Is it a fire hazard? That situation was a fire hazard as well. What about a mechanical failure or power outage? You know, what if we had a nest up on the Madison Tap up north of Keyhole Reservoir where the city of Gillette gets their water? You know, what if that went down for 4 or 5 days? That'd probably be pretty rough situation. They'd have to be pulling water from all kinds of sources. Or worse yet, and this is something that really hits home to Precorp, we take safety very seriously. So what if there's a potential it could cause bodily harm or human risk? Those are definitely emergency situations. So once you determine that the nest has been is considered an emergency, at least from our standpoint, the first thing we do is we contact the Office of Law Enforcement with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. In that case, it would be, in our case, it would be Bo Stone out of Cody. Very nice gentleman to work with. We've been working with him for a little over 1.5 years or so. But he's very accommodating to us. One of the nests that we had to move happened to be on a weekend, and he was very accommodating. We explained to them what type of species, where this bird nest is located, and then all the other details that we really need to provide for him to make a decision. We also provide him with our professional opinion. That's one of the nice things I like about working with the Fish and Wildlife Service. You know, you don't get that very often in many industries, but they'll turn around and say, Tracy, what do you think? Do you think this is going to be a danger at some point in time? And then we also explain any special circumstances. A lot of things people don't realize is sometimes there's circumstances where it would lead to an emergency regardless. For example, this health-related requirements I was telling you about. We have 95 meters on our system that we need to be concerned about because there's health equipment tied to them. They need that electricity for either oxygen pumps or whatever. And then, of course, we just wait for the answer out of Office of Law Enforcement. I can tell you that I've never really waited more than about 2 days for that answer. Most of the time, it's fairly immediate. So it's really not a long waiting game. While we wait for that authorization, there's some things you got to consider. You know, try to plan the nest moving activities to occur on warmer days, or at least when you have the full effect of the sun. Thank you, Gwen. That's saved my bacon a few times. But you certainly don't want to plan an event like that, especially with eggs or something like that, during the middle of a snowstorm or something like that. You're just asking for trouble there. Make sure you have adequate space in a holding container to house the chicks and the eggs. I put this picture of my little egg incubator on here because it's not a very big one, you know, a little personal lunch size one. It holds most of the eggs that we would ever deal with. But one time, as a matter of fact, Erica Peckham is here. She helped us on one of the moves, and you get up there and, oh wait, they were eggs last week, but now you're moving chicks, and they don't necessarily fit in there. And on the second move with the ferruginous hawks, the one chick was about the size of a football, and so he pretty much consumed that container. Try to have an experienced biologist available if you can. Gwen helped us for many years. She still would drop her hat and probably help us right now. We try to spread the love. We have the Fish and Wildlife Service helped us. We've had the Wyoming Game and Fish help us. I don't think we've had the BLM of the Forest Service. Actually, the Forest Service did help us. Early on in our moving, we moved a couple different nests for the Forest Service with Tim Byer just south down by Wright. But, you know, there's a lot of folks out here that will actually lend a hand in these situations. The more you plan, the more prepared you are for those surprises, like that set of chicks that we came across. You know, I really wasn't sure we had been authorized to move eggs, so I really wasn't sure. But sometimes when you're in the field, you have to make decisions. Biologists know this quite readily, but you have to make decisions that are in the best interest of that species. So we ended up moving very quickly. So step one, pre-moving plan. Walk through the nest plan with my line foreman. You really talk to him about all the details. He actually assigns different individuals to different tasks, makes things go smoother. He'll put, for example, he'll say, yeah, I want, you know, Mike to work on the digger truck because he's very good at that, or something like that. And they're all good at their jobs, very, very good, and good people to work with. But he'll kind of set it up that way. You also work with the wildlife biologist. I talked to Erica on that move that you'll see here in a little bit. I talked to her several times before we actually did the move. Even though it happened in a short period of time, we talked several times. You break down those construction details, because in reality, you're working in Powder River's world now. We build power line. We know how to do it. We know how to do it efficiently. And so you break all those details down, and that's very important for the biologists to know too, because then they know when to stay out of the way and when to get involved. You explain the details of the construction to the biologist, just like I said. And then, you know, the nice part is the biologists, I'm not a biologist, and typically our linemen don't really dabble in that kind of stuff either. So it's good to have a biologist involved, because then they can pay attention to the important things to the species, like how long that egg has been, you know, out from underneath the parent, or something like that. Review the weather forecast. Like I said earlier, you don't want to plan this kind of stuff in inclement weather. It's not, you know, you can wait for a while. Hasn't been very many situations where we've had to jump on things. And then, of course, safety, safety, safety. Safety is a big deal at Powder River, like I said. We have these talks frequently. Every time our linemen are out on a job, they have what's called a tailgate meeting, and they talk about safety issues. Every meeting that we have, we talk about safety issues. Most recently, when I was meeting with the Fish and Wildlife Service, we introduced our safety concept to them as well. We have a safety share before every meeting. Usually it's a relevant thing, so I shared something that I found in the field that was fairly dangerous that you need to be cognizant of. But safety is a big thing. Speed is of essence during moves. So with that increased speed, you have an increased risk of incidents. I like to have everybody show up to where we're going to take off at least an hour ahead of time. Sometimes that's not completely possible, but you can sit there and talk about their roles and how this is going to play out when you're actually moving the nest. You need to have an emphasis on where those incidents occur. Like, for example, moving trucks around, large trucks around structures and people. You got to be very careful and understand what their job is so that you don't get in their way. So then we mobilize the entire crew to an assembly area far enough away that it doesn't really impact the birds, but close enough that you can assemble your materials, load them back up on the truck, and then quickly drive down to the site. Like I said, speed is of essence. So you want to try to take care of all the details up front. Here we've got some of our linemen actually assembling a platform before we actually move in. This is the project that Erica was involved with, and her and I were up glassing, making sure that the parents were still on the nest, and just watching things and the general tendencies of the birds. We're also talking about, so one of the things that happens, and we'll talk about that actually next slide. She was actually notating, always letting me know, hey, it's 1:40 or whatever the adult left the nest, and so on and so forth. The other thing is you got to be careful of is any dangerous tendencies or characteristics the birds might display. We had a situation in Gillette, just outside of town here, where the Game and Fish asked us to help put a chick back in a nest. Honestly, I don't even remember what species it was. Lee and Eddie was the warden there, and so we got out there, and he says, yeah, they're pretty feisty. And I said, oh, okay. And I looked over at Tyler Nash, and he said, let's put him in the bucket. So he got up there, and a lot of times that bird was coming down, sort of not really hitting him hard, but it was getting awful close, and even Ira was getting pretty nervous. So we end up, controlling things from the ground. But that's one of the things that we need to be really mindful of, and that's the safety of our linemen. So then it's time, it's really go time. We drive down, we all get in our trucks, start up at the same time, and then you kind of very quickly and methodically move down to the site. When you get down there, one of the things you got to be very careful of is you've got a lot of moving parts now. You've got a bucket truck trying to get in position to place the structure. You've got, a digger truck. You've got a bucket truck trying to get in position so that they can remove that nest and eggs. You got a service truck typically that, one of the things, like I said, in safety, we always have a crewman that's sitting there watching out for the well-being of the crew. So they're kind of parked off even further away than those other two are. Our bucket truck, or our digger truck, you see they have the pole that we just assembled attached to their truck. What they're doing is they're parking, they're putting their landing gear down, they're pulling the auger around, and they're going to plug a hole. And keep in mind that we've already done all the planning. We've already did the locates, so on and so forth, so we knew we weren't going to dig into anything. He's digging a hole, and he's going to plant that pole, and then he's going to use a pneumatic compressor to tamp it down. At the same time, we've got a gentleman in a bucket truck, a person in a bucket truck, going up to remove that nest and to gather the chicks. Little shortcoming that I had is I ordered the wrong size gloves. I always try to get them to wear plastic gloves or some sort of glove so that they don't, just a good idea to have. I know people that'll actually handle the chicks and such with their bare hands, but we don't typically do that. They're a little small, so that they don't go all the way on its glove, but part of the reason that there's only one person in that bucket right now is because he's taken that nest off of a structure that's hot. It's energized, very dangerous. So we typically like the biologist to help us with the move, use handle the chicks and the nest materials and such, but we don't get them in the bucket until after we get it down off that unsafe structure. Then we reassemble the nest and the chicks, and you can see Erica here helping the line foreman actually in this case. They're actually taking all the materials and they put them on the structure, and then we use small bits of wire that we run through some of the major pieces of material, and you twist them on the bottom so that they can't come up again. But we try not to use very many of them because we know they'll be used elsewhere if they ever come loose, but that's what we use to tie down the nest, and then we typically line nest. If we can keep that liner intact, we try to line the nest like that so we can place the eggs and chicks back in there. Then we store all the equipment. You can see here Erica and Jeff are coming down from that. Everyone else is cleaned up and moved out, and they're going to secure the bucket. We got Erica, I believe, out of her harness and everything right there. I can't remember if we actually took her out there or up on the hill, but get everybody cleaned up, and then we get the hay out of there. All the time we're monitoring those adults, that they're flying around or sticking around that nest. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they'll fly down 4 or 5 poles and land and sit there and watch you. But a lot of times they're just hovering right up above. And then, of course, the last thing we do is we give a full report to the Office of Law Enforcement, and we continue monitoring the nest. The monitoring consists of, when the linemen are out in the area, they're out there frequently. They'll drop by and say, "Hey, Tracy, I looked through the scope, and and they're still on the crossarm or dancing around or something like that. In this situation, we moved 3 chicks and 1 egg. The adults vacated the nest at 1:40 p.m. when we were pulling down there, and they got back on the eggs at 2:02 p.m. It's a 22-minute move. That's a whole lot of business going on in 22 minutes. And actually, this was probably one of our slowest times. I mean, we've done this. I know we did it with Gwen one time in 17 minutes. It just takes planning, and it takes a lot of conscious effort in being safe. So some of the lessons we've learned over the years is not all nests need to be moved. That's pretty evident with the numbers I showed you earlier. Agencies typically are very accommodating if you plan in advance. What I mean by planning in advance, you can't plan when some bird comes in and nests on your structure. Oh yes, you can. You can actually talk about the scenarios with the agencies before they happen. That's kind of how we deal with that. There are plenty of consultants and agency folks alike that will lend a hand and help in this effort. Precorp has several landowner members that actually appreciate us managing those impacts we have on the birds. They actually call us up frequently. We go out and get a bird untangled or whatever, and they appreciate that. Sometimes you can plan to the nth degree, and you still won't save a bird. Just a fact of life, folks. Roll up your sleeves and get it done anyway. Being good stewards of our lands and resources pays dividends in the long run. We hear the people saying, hey, we've seen more eagles than we've seen for a long time. Well, there's a lot of things, variables that go into that. But we'd like to think that we're part of that solution. So, anyway, any questions?
I had a question. We had moving and monitoring, but no removing. How many nests would you say you actually remove, inactive nests? And at what rate do birds showing back up rebuild those nests? And would it be worth putting an ANS there just for when they show back up?
That's a great question. So we had 77 nests that we've monitored over the last 5 years. And so every year after the birds have all fledged, then, and I forgot to mention her earlier, but Doris Hodge is standing in the back. She's actually partner in crime in terms of getting this work all done, but she'll actually issue service orders to the linemen after the breeding season to go remove inactive nests off of our structures. We've never had to deal with an eagle's nest. We couldn't necessarily remove an eagle's nest without approval or another permit, but thankfully they don't like to nest on our structures. Does that answer your question?
Just some of those other parts when they show back up the next spring. When they show back up that next spring and potentially rebuild that nest, I've heard that in some instances they'll come back 3 subsequent years and rebuild every year after someone has removed it. So it'd be worth your time in a lot of those cases just to put a nesting platform up right away, even if it's an inactive nest.
We got one of those, excuse me, we have one of those situations right now. We have a board member that notified me about 3 years ago that he had a red-tailed hawk trying to nest in the pocket of one of those double cross-arm structures. And so we went up and looked at it that first year. It was actually a fairly safe structure. We went ahead and let that business continue. After the season was over, we knocked the nest down. Next season came up, and it was there again. But it didn't stick around. They built the nest, and then they just didn't stick around. This year's the 3rd season, and he said that nest is back. So we're actually just getting ready to talk about that and how we're going to deal with that. Obviously, our decision is going to be based on, is this long-term effect? Is this dangerous to our system? Is it going to cause an outage? Is it something that we can go out and place pins and cover up on, or more of a permanent type of a cover up to allow them to nest on that structure indefinitely? Those are the types of things we ask ourselves. We haven't been back out there to address that, but the lineman tells me that the birds are pretty safe right now, so. Any other questions?
Thank you, Tracy. Could Ryan and the panelists move to the front?